Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, today I'm honoured to be speaking with baseball coach Justine Siegal. Justine, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming on, and I'm really excited to speak with you today about sports psychology, baseball coaching, the challenges that you faced growing up as a girl who is passionate about baseball in what seems like quite a masculine world. I think there's so much that we can talk about. To get us started, would you mind introducing yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Sure. I have to at least start my introduction with I was 13 when I was first told I should quit baseball because I'm a girl. And then it all kind of goes from there. I didn't quit baseball. I decided to play forever. And I became the first woman to coach baseball, professional baseball. I've coached 3 years as an assistant college baseball coach. And I have my PhD in sports psychology. So I founded the organization Baseball for All so that less girls are told they should quit baseball just because they're girls.
I want to start with a fantastic quote that a woman named Sally Anderson attributed to you. Sally is head of people development at Google. She says, Justine Siegal is an amazing visionary, change agent, and social justice crusader. Her story is a remarkable one that all women and men should hear. The amount of challenges, discrimination, and hostility she faced would have crushed the normal person. But Justine isn't normal. Her strength to be kind in the face of anger is a true inspiration. And it sounds to me like that adversity, that challenge started, as you mentioned there, at 13 years old, where you were basically told not to bother playing. It was never going to amount to anything.
Yes, I had a really good time playing baseball in the neighborhood league, pitcher, catcher, I was just one of the players. Maybe others thought it was odd, but I didn't think it was odd. But then I ended up getting a new coach, and he didn't think I should be playing on his baseball team. But unfortunately for him, he had no control over it, and I didn't quit. So I just kept going. And but certainly from 13 on, it became difficult.
Do you remember? I'd just like to, if I may, I'd just like to probe that a little bit, because you obviously faced various people in power. I mean, as a 13-year-old, to look up to your coaches and not have the kind of support that a 13-year-old would want or need in a sporting environment, that's tough. That's challenging. Do you remember at that time, without sounding too clinical about it, using any strategies, or did it just come naturally to you to persist, keep going, keep working at it?
I think both. So I think my desire to not let someone else win, kept me going. I think that the more people tried to take the game away from me, the more I loved it. And as I got older, I would say I had a lot of strategies that didn't work. I stayed in the game almost because of my stubbornness, but I didn't have a lot of fun because I felt that pressure of being the only girl. And I felt like if I strike out, they're going to say, see, girls can't play. And I was a pitcher, so it was very obvious if I performed well. And so I always felt the pressure of sort of holding up all girls, which is really not fair. And of course, I talk to girls now today and say they can't play like that. But back then, I didn't know any other girls to ask.
That's really fascinating. It sounds to me almost like your personality characteristic, this stubbornness and persistence, which are wonderful personality characteristics to possess in abundance. And at the same time, they provided some burden for you in terms of, wow, I have to persist, I have to keep going. But it sounds like there was a part of you that said, I don't want to do this. This isn't fun. This isn't enjoyable. It stopped you from enjoying the game.
Yeah, all of that's true. I mean, I loved baseball. I might spend my Friday night just throwing a ball against the wall in high school. You'd often catch me at a batting cage. So there were moments where it was fun, and usually I was in more control of those moments. Or if I went to baseball camp where, the pressure was less because the guys already knew me. So I had like this love for the game, and yet it was really difficult. And I suppose you could call it a burden. I just called it trying to play the game. I didn't know otherwise. But I did know I was, one step away from walking over to the softball field and being completely celebrated. And that seemed crazy to me, that there would be such a dichotomy when I was just a kid.
Do you remember what you were holding in your mind? Were you holding in your mind the future, making an impact as a girl? Were you holding in your mind, remaining playing for the rest of your life? Or was it just, hey, I love this game, I've just got to keep going?
I think that it was really just, I love this game and I have to keep going. But when I was 20, I ended up traveling to Venezuela, and I played, we went up to this small town up in the hills of Venezuela to play baseball. And I ended up pitching really well. We ended up getting beaten terribly, but I pitched well. And so a father came up to me at the end, and he said, my daughter asked if she could play baseball. And I said, no, girls don't play baseball. But now, after seeing me, that he was going to let his daughter play. And that's when the switch was, hey, I can help others through this game. And so then the responsibility became grander. And when I had my daughter at just 23, then I truly understood sort of the generational aspect of what I could do to stop letting other girls have the same experience.
That's amazing. So that one event in Venezuela sounds to me like it shifted the meaning for you. Not just from, I just want to play ball and this is what it's about. And yes, there's some tough times here, but I'm going to get through it. But it's also, there's a bigger picture here, just changing the meaning. And so when you reflect back, did that put more pressure on? Did you feel that put more pressure on you, or did it take away any kind of pressure?
I've never thought about that. I think it changed my whole course in life. I mean, really, I thought I would be a soccer coach, and I'd go coach college. And yes, I had dreams of being a baseball college coach, but there was a large part of me just, I played college and soccer, and it would be a pretty simple life to just go do that. And instead, I took this really hard path where I had to break barriers just to be on the field, to be the first. Everywhere I went, I had to be the first. And then I started a nonprofit, and amazingly, starting a nonprofit to help girls. I mean, you should have seen some of the backlash I got for that, and being called the devil, and it was like unbelievable. So I think a lot of it's stubbornness, and a lot of it's knowing that things are much more important than just yourself.
A bigger picture.
A much bigger picture. And having my daughter young in college allowed me to have that big picture. It definitely makes you shift where your mind and your energy is.
When did you start focusing on coaching?
So at about 16, I decided I wanted to be a college baseball coach. And my camp coach, who I had known for a couple of years, laughed at me. And he said, no man will ever listen to a woman on a baseball field. And I was so embarrassed I shared this dream with him. But I immediately started thinking, who is he? Who is he to tell me what I can't do? Because I've been hearing no all this time. And so I started thinking of, how can I make this happen? And I knew I wouldn't play at the same level as many male coaches at the college level. So I decided I would use education as a tool in my toolbox. And that's, I would get a PhD somehow, and I would just pursue the path. And so I did. I immediately started working at baseball camps, and going from there.
I think it's just so fascinating listening to you there, talking about Venezuela and how that changed some perceptions. And obviously that was 4 years after, but at 16 years old, coming up against this, horrendously sexist coach, laughing at you and announcing that no man's going to listen to you. And I think it almost feels human to be crushed by that. It almost feels human to be completely inhibited and walk away and go and do something else. But it sounds to me like you created this almost unlikely narrative of, well, who are you? Who are you to question me about this? And again, I suppose that's a part of you, or that was something deliberately that you did, like, I've got to find a way to get through this, or it just dawned on you, hey, hang on, who is this person?
I really think it's just part of who I am. I mean, obviously, I think these skills of resilience and integrity and leadership can all be taught. But, I was a very shy kid. I didn't have a lot of adults talking to me. I basically grew up in the dugout, surrounded by boys. So there's a little trauma there. But I just felt like I just had a very strong sense from when I was young of what is right and wrong, or what I felt was right and wrong. And being told I can't do something because I was a girl, I felt was wrong. And so I wasn't going to give in to it, because to me it was like a moral injustice, right? My heroes are Martin Luther King and Gandhi and Mother Teresa and these people that were helping others. So that's just kind of where I went from. That was my framework.
Other than role models, did that come from, if you don't mind me asking, did that come from somebody close to you, peers or family?
Books. I was so shy, I read a lot. So if I wasn't on the sports field, I was reading. And books allowed me to see these strong characters, whether they were fiction or nonfiction. And then as I got into college, one of the things I studied was leadership and under nonviolent protests, nonviolent social justice.
What were the most influential books?
I can't remember any now. They're like, they were an escape for me. Yeah. Obviously now, one of, to me, the most meaningful books is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Yeah. I think everybody should read that at least once. You're in charge of your perspective, and you're in charge of your actions. And you can just look at Jackie Robinson, who was the first man to break the color barrier in Major League Baseball, and how he couldn't fight back when he was being thrown out and called unbelievable words and then taunting. He just had to, the way he fought back was by performance. And Jackie is certainly one of the people that inspired me to keep going.
You're in charge of your perspective, which is something that you exercised as a 16-year-old. But not many 16-year-olds can do that, can they? Do you think?
I think they have it in them. Okay. Honestly, it may have helped that I was so shy. And so I was always thinking, internally, and I had so many inner dialogues with myself, that I really worked through what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be, and what I wanted to allow. And so I just kept going.
I think that's a really interesting take, that shyness or introversion leads towards more inner dialogue, potentially a stronger inner dialogue that you can use as a narrative to deal with adversity. I would imagine scientifically that's difficult to back up, but I think from a human perspective, I would imagine that's got some legs for a lot of young people.
Well, I think it created my own motivation. I wasn't looking for others' approval. I mean, I would have loved to have others' approval, but they weren't the source of my motivation.
You got laughed at. You shaped this narrative of who are you, and you created a strategy. I'm going to go away and get as much education as I can. Were you coaching whilst building up this education?
I was coaching when I was a teenager, and then I went off for college, and then I actually coached soccer, some high school soccer. And then when I had my daughter unexpectedly, it changed forces. So I finished my 4-year degree, then I got my master's, but I ended up becoming a PE teacher because that worked. I was able to be a PE teacher within her school. And then I realized at 30, I'm like, what am I doing? I'm totally off my path. And so I enrolled at Springfield College for my PhD in sports psychology and started coaching college baseball as an assistant. And it definitely showed that men will listen to a woman on a baseball field. I mean, what men care about is really the same thing women care about. Athletes care about whether as a coach you can make them better. Do you care about them? Do you know the game? Can you help the team win? Those are the things they care about. Yes, there's a huge shock when a woman is, you first come on, does she know these things? But once you show you do, I mean, I didn't really have any problems. And from those times, from coaching college, I was able to leverage that into professional baseball. In which, again, I would have to prove if I knew anything. And sometimes I had the opportunity to prove that, and other times the stint was too short to really show that. I remember the very last day of my very first pro gig in 2009. I mean, that's a long story, and I'm so grateful for that moment where I was able to coach the Brockton Rocks in independent baseball. But I mean, I was told I was worthless by another coach. I had another coach stop talking to me. I was kicked out of the locker room. I mean, there were all ways to try to get me to quit. But at the end, we're sitting there and I've just been let go, and we're all at the bar. I'm finally going out with the players because I've been let go. And the guy asks a question, and I give him an answer about hitting. And he goes, "Oh, you actually know what you're talking about." I'm like, "Yes, I do." But you had to have that experience because it was only the second time in the US that a woman had coached men's pro sports. And so you kind of like, I was the first, but I had been praying my whole life. They were the first team to have this experience with a woman. So they were still learning through that model versus me having these years of knowing what to say or what to do or, controlling your anger, that type of thing.
So you were coaching this professional team, the Rocks, and you actually had a coach, and I've listened to you speak about this on stage. You had a coach who essentially was effing and blinding at you, and in very simple terms, telling you were no good. That was the situation?
Yes. I mean, I don't know if it had anything to do with whether I knew anything or whether it really had to do with being a female on his field, but he was my favorite coach because he would tell me what he was thinking. And I much prefer someone being straight and direct than, you don't know what they're thinking and they're sort of passive aggressive. And we actually found each other a year later, and he's like, "I couldn't help but like you. I didn't want you on the field. I couldn't help but like you." And then only about 3 years later did he recommend me for a job, in which I ended up coaching with another team. So, the message and the lesson I learned from that was, while I was coaching that team, was to be kind when others were mean. And the reason for that was because I couldn't let anger dictate my actions. Anger is just chaos. So I needed to be able to keep my own peace within so I could keep going on my own path. And so I decided to be kind, to make actions of kindness. And when I was kicked out of the locker room, my daughter and I made the team brownies. And she's like, "Mom, what are we doing?" I'm like, "Well, we're gonna, literally stirring the brownies." The whole action of doing something kind, because I needed to keep my own peace. I didn't need to be liked. I just needed to not succumb to anger and frustration. And I had a lot of guys there who told me, you know, they didn't like how I was being treated, you know, that were supportive of me. It was just more of, it was a shock for them. It wasn't a shock for me. And I'm forever grateful that they took me on to begin with, because it started the path that I could go on. And now I must say that Major League Baseball has 5 women coaching between the minor leagues and one major league coach. Women are coaching. So, you know, I just had to bang my head against the wall for a decade. And then it cracked and other women were able to come through.
There's an interesting juxtaposition there in terms of, you talk about the importance, or at least in your world, your coaching world, the importance of, I'd use the word honesty. I think you said straightforwardness, honesty, and on the Sports Psych show previously, when I've spoken with people about leadership, there's leadership models out there that would put number 1 on the list of leadership attributes being honesty. So that makes sense. And you also talk about, at the same time, kindness in the face of meanness. And you also talk about this coach who sounds horrendous to you. Sounds like he was absolutely horrendous. I mean, just probably wouldn't get away with saying what he said now. I don't know that landscape well enough in the States. There seems to be an interesting, I don't think contradiction is the right term, but juxtaposition between, you know, you like straightforward and honesty, kindness in the face of meanness, and you really appreciated the straightforwardness of this coach, yet he was so mean to you.
He wasn't mean to me all the time. I just knew where he stood. Like, for example, I once came up with him with a coaching idea, and he goes, "That's a good idea." And he went and he implemented it. So I knew where he stood, and that was it. It was like, that was enough for him. Versus the passive aggressiveness is much more difficult to work with, in my opinion. I'd rather know where you feel and go from there. And, you know, that was 2009. And then when I coached with the A's during instructional leagues in 2015, it was a totally different experience. You know, the world had changed, men had changed, young men had changed. And I didn't have any troubles at all. And I had, men who would seek out my advice or my counsel or my throwing batting practice to them. You know, it was just a matter of, I was just ahead of the time, or I had to create the time. I'm not sure what the phrase would be.
I want to move on in a couple of minutes to your coaching philosophies, bringing psychology into it, because I think, you know, you're going to give some rich examples and some great ideas. I know, again, from listening to you, that you have if you don't mind regaling us with this story, a wonderful Billy Beane story. I think you stalked Billy Beane, did you not, to try to get an experience. And please excuse my ignorance as an Englishman here. Billy Beane was general manager of
the A's, the Oakland A's.
Thank you very much. I apologize. Yeah, you really tried to get some experience at the A's, didn't you?
So in 2011, I decided to go after my high school dream, which was to throw batting practice to a major league team. So if you're not familiar with baseball, batting practice is to throw the ball so that the hitters can hit it. You know, it's not to strike them out. You just want to throw what's called a four-seam fastball over the plate and let them hit it. Not a difficult physical task, but no one had ever done it before. And so I asked, and it's kind of a longer story of how many people I had to ask. But Billy Beane was the first person who said yes. In fact, it took him 5 seconds to decide that he was going to say yes. And so he was more open than other coaches, just generally speaking. So after I threw batting practice, I went to scout school through Major League Baseball, and I learned that sometimes these major league teams will take international coaches into their instructional league program to help train worldwide. And I thought, oh, that's my window. It's a very small window, but if they have made an exception here, why not make an exception for me? So I asked Billy Beane for 4 years if I could be that exception, if I could be one of his instructional league coaches. And he finally said yes in the 4th year. And just every year I would just email him and say, hey, I finished my PhD. Hey, I finished scout school. Hey, I finished this. I kept him up on how I was improving myself. And so finally in 2015, I got the yes. And it was only 2 weeks of coaching. And it took a lifetime to get there. And that jersey is now sitting in our National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown as the first woman to coach for a Major League Baseball organization.
It was a 20-year journey, wasn't it?
Yes, it was forever. It was forever. And I mean, it was just the most incredible experience.
May I ask, what was the experience like? Were you nervous on the first day? Did that impact you?
Was I nervous? So I was hitting what's called fungo. I was hitting ground balls to infield. It's the first day. And all you do is throw up the ball, and then you hit it with the bat. You throw the ball to yourself, you hit it with the bat. I missed the first time. I was so nervous, I didn't even see the ball. It's like I had temporary blindness. And then the second one, everybody's waiting. So the second one I hit weakly, because I'm still sort of temporarily blind. But by the third one was fine, and that nervousness sort of went away. Again, you just feel this pressure of needing to perform. Again, this is a simple task, but everyone's staring at you. So that's where it feels. When I threw batting practice, I threw to 6 major league teams, I believe, and you throw the ball 50 feet. So I knew it was not a physical task. It was a mental task. Could I do this? And I knew that if I failed, I would have, it'd be a long time before another woman got a chance. So what I did to prepare myself mentally, and, I didn't have any guidance. These were just things that I decided to do. And I was a student. In fact, one professor told me, if you leave to go through a batting practice, you realize you won't graduate without this class, and that you need to make a responsible decision. And of course, I went to throw batting practice. And so to prepare myself, I physically got ready. And I was in the gym a couple hours a day because I was so sort of scarred. I had no idea if they'd have me throw for an hour, which they didn't. They had me throw like any other coach. But I got my arm ready because I had some arm injury. And then what I did was I went to D1 schools and I threw to them. And the reason why I did this is because I needed to put myself in the position where I walk in, every man turns around and says, what's this woman doing? And then immediately perform. I needed to be able to walk in the room, take command, and perform. And by doing this with these different D1 teams, I think I did 4 or 5 colleges, it allowed me to experience somewhat the pressure that I might experience with the professional team. And obviously the professional team, the backstop was lined with international reporters. So there was clearly more experience, but without putting myself into the best performance cooker I could, I don't think I would have been nearly as ready to be on the big stage.
Did you settle straight into throwing those pitches?
I did. I threw flying the very first day I threw to the Indians first, Cleveland Indians. And then the second day I threw to the A's. And one of the things I prepared myself was with my own reset word. And so I had actually, I had injured like my groin a week before. And so we had quickly tried to heal it, but then I slipped on the dewy grass right before I was supposed to throw it to the A's, and it aggravated it. So I wasn't able to use the same mechanics I had to let my body rely on. And I had to change those mechanics. But as I was changing the mechanics to figure out where I could throw from, how I could get the form back, I was throwing poorly. I was throwing balls. And so there is this moment where you think, okay, I could completely panic because, again, the international media is recording everything I'm doing. But instead, I had a reset word, and I took a breath, and I was able to then throw strikes and find a new way to plant my foot, so to speak, with my injury. And I ended up doing fine. But without preparing that, without already having that reset word, then I would not have been prepared for that situation, and emotions would most likely have taken over.
Do you mind if I ask, what was your reset word?
Yes, it has a backstory. A 9-year-old girl was killed in a mass shooting, and her name was Christina Taylor Green, and her dream was to play in Major League Baseball one day. And so I wore a patch that her baseball league had commemorated. They made this patch, and I wore that patch. And so my reset word was really her, a memory, because it reminded me of something bigger, to get out of my own head, because I was on a mission. I was doing something much bigger, and I needed to be in that space and not about my ego.
So it almost feels like it wasn't just a reset word. It was a reset. It was a reset emotion. It was a reset story. It almost feels so much more than a reset word.
I'd say that's true.
I'm not surprised it worked.
Wear a patch for a 9-year-old girl who was shot for really no reason. It was humbling to be able to wear that patch. And as my story was told in the media, so was hers. And so that was really great to be a part of that. And I met with her mother in the end, and it was something.
That's incredible. And if I may ask, what kind of conversations went on? Whether it's over the 2 weeks or the first few days or the first week, was it mostly positive? Was it supportive? How were you received?
During the BP, I was received really well.
Yeah.
I mean, it was literally like being in the movies. I'd walk in, I'd get a whole new uniform, whole new Rays uniform, or Cardinals uniform, or Mets uniform. And I'd had my daughter with me the entire way, and she was 13. And so it was really a dream. It was a lot of work emotionally. You never really quite relax. I did relax on the very last day. And when I flew to the Mets, it kind of finally became like the norm. But it was incredible. And then I was able to, a few years later, leverage that into a coaching job. And, I've gone on from there.
In terms of coaching, you have a PhD in sports psychology. Do you use that? Do you utilize that PhD on a daily basis in your sessions, in your activities, in your communication, or not so much?
I don't use them in sessions. For example, let's work on concentration or visualization. Yeah. Sports psychology has become a part of who I am. The ability to communicate, the ability to quickly identify how someone learns, what motivates an individual, how to best reach them when they're angry and disappointed in themselves. That's where my degree has come into the most play. Certainly, I can refer someone into sort of these other drills, but I've never really sat down and counseled an athlete. It's just become part of how I coach and how the vibe that I give on a bench. It's when I was coaching with the A's, this really interesting thing happened. And, we probably had 8 other coaches there. 2 of them had played in the major leagues, and the others had played professionally. And my background's actually pitching, even though I've worked with hitters, but my background is actually pitching. And this player comes up to me, and he sits down with me, and he tells me his problem and why he's struggling, and he doesn't know what to do. And so, I talk about giving a chance for your body and your mind to catch up. And, I mentioned to the other coach who's actually probably giving him this feedback. I just said, hey, can you give the guy a thumbs up next time he's at bat? I'm not going to, tell him what our conversation was, just a little small positive, like, we're okay. And that guy went up to the plate and hit a home run. And then he went and hit a double. And it's not that. What's so interesting to me is that he came to me and asked for help. You talk about being 16 and being told a man won't listen to you. This man came to me, and instead of the guys with all the experience everyone said they had. And I think that has a lot to do with the vibe I give, the respect I get from working so hard to be where I was, never giving up, and the communication style, which, part of that vibe. I wasn't there to correct him. I knew I wasn't there to correct him. I was there to help him process the information that he was fighting himself with. And so, I think sports psychology in my degree is just part of who I am, and I hope best serves the athletes, and even how I work with other coaches in that communication and those learning styles.
There's so much rich stuff there, and there's so much I want to ask you about, but you talk about the vibe that you give. Are you conscious of that? Are you consciously striving to give off a certain vibe? And or is that built from the psychology?
No one's ever asked me that before. I think being a woman is a different vibe, but I think also you need to be qualified. You can't just throw a woman into a dugout and expect everyone to respond well. There has to be the qualifications behind it. I think that I am generally fairly quiet unless I need to otherwise be. I'm fine being in a leadership role up in front, telling people what to do, or being in the back. Gratitude is very much who I am. So I think it's not a vibe on purpose. It's a vibe of who I am. I don't try to be someone else. I think that's possible. That's hurt me at times because I think sometimes I think other coaches, put on an act a little bit to gain their own respect. Whereas I've always just sort of been who I am. And I am generally pretty quiet, and I prefer learning by gathering a lot of information and then coming out with the answer, if that makes any sense.
It makes 100% sense. And you said something interesting there, and I would use the word authenticity. Do you think that being authentic is a vital, not tool, but way of being for a coach?
Absolutely. And, even if I go back to my 2009 team, when I was, I kind of held my own social protest, and I sat outside the locker room, right outside after a game, so that every single player had to pass me. Because I wanted them to know I was still there. And I couldn't go in, and I couldn't get my meal, because that's where dinner is, in the locker room. And I finally got my meal from the equipment manager. And as I was sitting there, the locker room door opens up, and our catcher comes out, and he sits next to me. I have no idea what he said. I just know that he left his sanctuary to come sit with me to tell me I'm not alone. And he went back in, and another player did the same thing and just sat with me. And I think that if I had decided to be angry, if I decided to have bitterness, if I hadn't chosen kindness, that I hadn't just been my authentic self, those players don't come out in that moment and show their support. And I think that that's one of the times I felt most cared for as a coach. Those guys leaving the comfort of their own locker room just to sit with me and say, I'm here with you. So I think authenticity is extremely important. And I think not just for the players, but for ourselves.
I think it's fascinating. And as you're speaking there, aside from authenticity, I've written down 4 words. And I probably won't ask you a question here, but maybe you'd be good enough to comment on these 4 words. And the first word is a little bit of an aside. The first word is integration. And I'm using that word purely from your answer related to the psychology and coaching. That it's not so much that I do formal psychology sessions, is what I hear you say, but psychology is integrated into everything I do, which sort of sits neatly with, I suppose, my philosophy. And this is what excited me when you said that, is for me, psychology is omnipresent. It's always there. It's there nonstop. Psychosocial drives technical, tactical, physical. And I think too often we isolate psych when we should integrate psych. So there's that word, integration. But there's 3 other words: control, relationship, and competence. All the way through this conversation, I've had that sense of that control, even from the age of 13 or younger, because of your sort of formal self-education with these books, that sense of control. And for me, almost the point of having a sense of control is also to develop relationships in your world, in the system around you, the team, the club, the organization, and also your interpersonal skills with regard to that relationship. So control and relationship, and then competence, the building of competence. You come across, you give that vibe because you're competent, because education is a big part of what you do. And as you said, you gather knowledge and then you speak rather than speaking first, which can be a trait that coaches engage with. So as I said, there's not going to be a question there, but integration, control, competence, relationship, do those strike a chord?
Definitely. And I would add to it just gratitude. Grateful for the people I'm with, grateful for the opportunity, grateful to have what you might call a burden, to kind of keep banging your head against the wall and make a crack on it so others can come through.
Let's just play on just the last few minutes here. Let's just play on one of those words, relationship. Is that something that you strive to build with players on purpose? Do you have specific things that you do? Or do you just leave that down to your personality? Because it's interesting that you said, you alluded earlier to being either shy or introverted. And I think those 2 are different and can be confused. But
sure. When I was 16, I was shy. Now I'm introverted. I specifically work harder to make relationships with players now, introducing myself, or just making the contact as much as I can. I can't really say how, because it's so different in every environment that I walk into. Yeah. Obviously, being myself, it's amazing how far you can go with listening. I'm currently studying motivational interviewing, just loving that concept of even more formality. I would just say I was listening before, but now I kind of have a process to even take it a bit further with affirmations and summaries and so on, and helping create change within an athlete. But I've never tried to be not myself. And I think that's worked for me most of the time. I think I often wonder, hey, what if I had been louder? What if I'd been more vocal? Would that have helped me? And then there's times where, hey, I try not to be too much front and center because people aren't ready for that. And so it's this balance, and I truly have no idea which would have been better for my career. I certainly know more than many coaches have thought I've known, because I don't normally suggest information unless I've asked. And then with the coaches, with the players, you have to be careful when you're building relationships. I think it's different as a woman. It has to be very on site. So meaning, I can't just go drinking with the guys. Yes, I could, but all we need is a rumor to destroy everything. So I'm very conscious of how I act generally I remember coaching with a team of guys, and I was becoming friends with one of the coaches, and we're sitting there on the field and literally chatting before practice starts, and he goes, "Hey, we have to stop talking." I'm like, "Why?" "Because people think something's happening." And I'm like, how, I'm so used to this, but it's still shocking every time. But with players now, the good thing is that I'm an old lady. I'm 45 now, so they see me as their mother. It was a little different when I was 30, but I know I have my daughter's older than them for some of these times. So I enjoy it. And I think being a woman, I think being a mother, they're tools in my toolbox that other people don't have. I know what happens when someone's hungry. Hey, let's all make sure we grab extra snacks, As stereotypical as that is, mothers are just used to thinking of 20 things while getting one thing, accomplished. So I think that's all part of my vibe, my perseverance, my being a mother, my PhD. I've been called Doc before. Hey, Doc, what do you think? And
you like that title?
I don't care. I like my name. Most people, don't even know I have a PhD unless I tell them. But usually when I'm introduced to the team, we mention that because it's something I have that others don't.
Absolutely. I mean, just fascinating stuff. And I think, as you say, borrowing from parenthood, being a parent, there must be a range of skills that you utilize daily. And I was very excited to hear you mention motivational interviewing, because we did actually have Professor Stephen Rolnick on the Sports Site show. He was one of the founders. And it's a framework that I utilize, and I think is endlessly fascinating. And it's endlessly fascinating how you can help others motivate themselves rather than feeling that you have to motivate them, which I think is an interesting, again, to use that word, juxtaposition. I think as coaches, we feel we have to motivate others, and it's like, well, hang on, actually, is this more about helping players to motivate themselves and build the skills to motivate themselves?
I think as coaches, we want to fix things.
Yes.
And taking a step back and being patient enough to walk the player through, it takes practice. We're never done as coaches learning. We're never done as someone practicing. It's constant learning, and it's constant. We have to be better ourselves in order to ask others to be better too.
Well, I certainly think you saying that suggests to me that I can comfortably come back to you, and I could talk to you for a long time, at least another hour. So with your permission, I'd love to get you back on the Sports Site show to talk about those kind of skills, because what you've said there resonated with me deeply. The capacity to be patient, I think, is vital. I think it would be remiss of me not to, just in the last couple of minutes, to talk a little bit about Baseball for All, your organization. Incredible listening to or watching some of the content on your website about Baseball for All. And you were on Queen Latifah's show as well, which is amazing. So can you tell us a bit about your organization?
Sure. Baseball for All is a national nonprofit empowering girls to coach, play, and lead. We want girls to know that they're perfect as they are, and they don't need a box to fit in. Girls here in the U.S. are often told they should play softball and not baseball, and they should dress a certain way. If you're going to play, put a ribbon in your hair. And we want our girls to know that they are athletes, and they deserve everything boys have. And so we run events for girls to play baseball with other girls. We help communities start baseball teams. We do webinar series so that they can see role models of Major League Baseball of other women. And to me, it's a social justice issue. If you tell a girl she can't play baseball, what else will she think she can't do? And you can push that even further and say, well, when a boy sees a girl not playing baseball or suddenly dropping out, what does a boy think girls can do? And I just say, throw away these stereotypes for everybody. Throw them away, and we rise up together and let people, and in this case, like kids, pursue their passions. So Baseball for All is very dear to my heart, and really just looking to stop that dialogue that girls can't play baseball and instead turn into girls can do anything they want.
Well, that's amazing and really well said. And as I mentioned earlier, there's some fantastic content, whether it's you being interviewed by celebs or a wonderful half an hour talk that you gave at a leadership convention, which I enjoyed immensely. I think it was actually it was a very funny and emotional talk that you gave. And I know that others would love to see it. So with your permission, could you mention your website address and maybe how people are you on social media? How can people follow you? And how can people find out about Baseball for All?
Sure. My personal website is Justine Siegal, SIEGAL.com, and that's where you'll find that video. And the nonprofit site is baseballforall.com, FOR. And just on Twitter and Instagram, it's Justine Baseball, very easy. Justine Baseball on Twitter, Justine Siegal, I think, on Instagram. And on Twitter, I try to, mix in sort of some basic coaching tips that are based around sports psychology, how to relate to players, how players might best perform, and mix that in also with just, fun baseball polls and girls baseball doing this and that kind of thing.
It's an awesome timeline. It's brilliant. Justine, what a fantastic hour. That's just flown by. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to the Sports Psych Show. That was awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was fascinating talking to you.
Well, wasn't that awesome, everybody? I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.